Hey everybody, XEI here. It's time for something new, another little bit of an experiment, because I started reading randomly, not randomly, I intended to read this, but Mass Effect Revelations by Drew Karpyshyn, the mastermind behind the Mass Effect series, and I wanted to figure out a way to do a let's read. This isn't really a let's read, maybe it is, I don't know. I wanted to do a series where, kind of like the Dragon Age one with the Stolen Throne, where I could kind of dissect the book using the narrative patterns framework, something I've been developing or working on for the last 10 years, just for private use, just for enjoyment. But I feel like it's kind of, it can be set up as a sort of skeleton for things like this, where I feel like I have an angle to bring to things and make it more enjoyable, like instead of just doing book reviews. But what I wanted to do, because I'm taking so long to get through the other series by reading one chapter at a time and breaking it down with this framework, I wanted to just read these books, so the Mass Effect books in particular, so that I can do them in a sitting. I got 80 pages in one sitting while smoking a cigar. It was wonderful. It was peaceful. It was very enjoyable, and it allows me to get things done. It's something that I could do while I'm just kind of chilling. I'm not editing videos, I'm not doing anything, but while chilling, I might as well, hey, work on something that could be a video like this one. And so what I'm going to do with this series, how it's going to evolve, so I'm going to continue doing the Dragon Age one chapter by chapter and seeing how it goes. Like, that one's really fine-grained analysis. To be honest, I just said that, and maybe I'll change that up too, but I don't know. I'll let you guys decide what you guys like best after you see how this one goes. This is going to be a lot shorter video because, of course, I ramped through 80 pages, and I'm recording this right away so that I can do this while the thoughts are fresh. And I just quickly wrote down some notes with my narrative patterns framework thing with the breakdown of the pages and stuff. I don't know if you guys, if you're new here, I need to give a little bit of a summary of what the narrative patterns framework is. I believe that all storytelling, whether this is movies, TVs, comic books, novels, if it's done in a way that's sort of captivating and gets good, like I feel like, anyways, this is all subjective, of course, but I've done this exercise for so many things at this point that I do really see patterns. I see patterns in storytelling. It's a big love of mine for the last 20, almost 30 years. I mean, since I was a kid. But I've started to academically study storytelling. I was concentrating on this kind of, I was concentrating on ideas during university and even post-education. I still took courses to investigate this stuff, etc., etc., etc. And then I came up with this thing for fun one day, and I started messing around with it over the last 10 years. And so I've got this thing called the narrative patterns framework, which I believe that there's a calculated amount of time that each act or each pattern fits in, regardless of what the storytelling is. There's certain beats happen at certain times in storytelling that make the story captivating and memorable for the audience on a subconscious level. That's the best way I can put it, without getting kind of too deep in the weeds there, if that's the saying. Anyways, so when I'm using this for novels, what I do is I check the last page. This book is about 320 pages long. I stick the page count into this equation. I then get a series of page counts that are kind of block these patterns off, and it allows me to dissect and deconstruct the content based on these ideas. Okay, so I've read up to chapter 6, so 88 pages worth of book, and so what that encompasses is 2 particular pattern clusters, I call them, because in each pattern there's then 3 subcategories. But because of the way I'm going to do this series, where I'm going to talk about the cluster itself, and I'm going to do 2 at a time, so basically 80 pages worth of content per video instead of the 20 to 30 pages per chapter, which is what I'm doing on the other series, which makes it kind of hard to kind of talk to in the more condensed fashion chunks. So I'm going to get right into it, because again, my thoughts are fresh and my notes are here, and hopefully I can be, for those of you who have read the book, I might as well say right now, like, honestly, there's going to be spoilers in here. I mean, I can't do this without getting, deep into the details that are happening in this book, especially if I'm doing deconstructive analysis on it. So, and I'm going to be speculating a lot, which means no spoilers in the comments, because I am reading this for the first time, which means that I might say things that are not true, but based on the patterns exist in a way where I can speculate most of the time pretty precisely, but again, I'm saying this not knowing, because sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't work. So don't spoil, just go along for the ride and enjoy my speculation. And if you're going to comment below, which I absolutely engage, but just restrict it to the page count. So if you have the book yourself, you can read it with me. I'm probably going to get through this one a lot faster than I'm doing the Dragon Age one, just because it's a lot easier to sit in these like larger chunks. I can read pretty fast when I don't have to do it in front of a camera and analyze every line and comment on paragraphs and stuff. So let's start with the first category. I call it the introduction pattern, and it's made up of three things. It's the setting, the theme, and the story, all clumped together. I'm also gonna say very specific page numbers, but don't take them as specifics. It's kind of just ballparking, but I'm gonna use what's in this equation output to kind of draw me along in case you're reading along and you want to see how this lines up. So by about page 14, you get the theme. Like, the author sort of establishes, not sort of, they have to establish the theme of the book. And what I mean by theme, real quick, the way I've bylined this is it sets up the premise of the entire story within these 15 pages. It's usually a scenario that indicates the direction, or it's a question posed by another character. So what I took away from the first 15 pages is that it's about discovery. I mean, it's not too far-fetched. The book's name itself is called Revelation, so obviously it's about discovery. But in the first 15 pages, you get introduced to John Grissom. He's a rear admiral when this starts, but I'm getting the sense that he doesn't do anything anymore. He's sort of retired. But this prologue is all about the idea that, and I'm going to read the line here on the second page. It's, in many ways, humanity was like a child, naive and sheltered. Not that this was surprising in the whole of humanity's long history. It was only in the last 2 centuries that they had broken the bonds of Earth and ventured into the cold vacuum of space beyond. And true interstellar travel, the ability to journey to destinations beyond their own solar system, had only been made possible in the last decade. Less than a decade, in fact. And so it really sets up the premise here and leads into the theme through the entire prologue, which is essentially a lot has happened very quickly for humanity. They are discovering a lot of things that they're not that is completely new to them. Religions have they have to question a lot of things, and they have to, like, their understanding of their faith has changed, and so it's created a bunch of other sects of thinking, and the politics of the world. There's finally this unification, I believe it's of 16, the 16 biggest powers, political powers of the world, have come together because they've realized that they had to, because they're now stretching into the stars, and they're starting to colonize other planets. And then, of course, they discover the Prothean mass effect that allows them to travel even further. And then this leads into the whole first contact war with the Turians, because they basically they go into Turian territory without knowing. They were naively doing so, but the Turians, of course, attack because they think it's like this offensive push by this non-discovered race, and then they take over Shanxi. And it's a lot of, like, when I'm reading codexes, it's funny in the game, like, I already got a lot of this information because of 3 games of codexes, but reading it in a novel makes all the difference, man. It really paints a much richer tapestry behind these events in history. It was very cool to sort of like have all this codex information finally ingrain itself. Anyways, then the Shanxi thing happens, the Turians take over, and then the humans have to kind of, okay, well, do we take this back or we don't? Theme is discovery. It's happening too fast. It's unstabilizing humanity. It's a lot of, like, urgent decisions have to be made in order to integrate into this intergalactic community. And so Grissom goes to Actress because he needs to pick up some new people, some new soldiers, because he knows something's going down and he needs people on the front line. Of course, this is where we get introduced to Anderson. Anderson is just coming off of the N7 program. He's the first guy that Grissom interviews, because it's a funny comment here, because it's kind of like an alphabetical list he's going through of people that he can, like, bring in, but it's like right away Anderson, he's like, it's a winning bet right away. And the chapter ends with what, the whole we have three options. We can retreat, we can surrender, or we can attack. Which one do we do? And they kind of break. It's a really cool exchange. I really enjoy the exchange between Grissom and Anderson. It really paints the character of Anderson being like, he's so composed, he's so analytical, he understands respect, but he's not intimidated. He gets his thoughts across, but they're very succinct. He's very practical, and he basically just says, if you have a choice between, attacking and dying or surrendering, would you rather, fight for your freedom, or would you rather die as a slave or be controlled as a slave? And of course, this is before they really knew what the Turians were and that the council was going to get involved. Anyways, this leads us into establishing the story, and I have it marked here as page 28. And so if I flip to page 28 here, it's like 2 pages away from the ending of chapter 1. So in novels, chapter 1 and the prologue really need to establish what the entire book is going to be about, and this book does it wonderfully. It paints the entire idea of what you're going to get into, which is essentially you get introduced to Anderson and his team, and Anderson and his team, I think it's 6 or 8 years later. Let me just validate this. 8 years later, so after Anderson gets pulled in and he becomes Staff Lieutenant David Anderson, he gets his team. I'll go into the characters when we get into Act 2 if they're still around, because Act 2 is really where that exploration happens with side characters. Despite them being characters tied to Anderson, it's really in one of the patterns is all about just getting deeper into the side characters, the supporting characters, and so that's where I'll spend time kind of going to these characters if they still matter by then. In any case, Anderson and his team get sent off to investigate Sidon because something's gone down there. It's this lab that's part of the Alliance, but something shady has gone down. It's been they get this like distress signal, and so the Anderson's team gets sent out there and they land, and that's literally the end of chapter 1. You get the sense that Anderson doesn't waste any time. He's just very like the execution manner of his team is it's very tight, and so chapter 2 starts with them going into Sidon to investigate what's going down. So chapter 2 starts at page 32. That's still establishing the story. So 32 to chapter 3, which ends us off at page 44. Page 44 is actually where the second pattern cluster exists, which I call conflict arises. What this pattern is about is that something happens. Something happens that shakes up the comfort of the initial of chapter 1, of the introduction. And of course, this is very explicit because it's Anderson and his team going into Sidon to basically confront the hostile forces, which they presume are mercenary forces. They're the Blue Suns that they're going to take out. And so all of chapter 3 is dedicated to Anderson and his team crawling through this base to find out if there's anyone left behind. There is, and they get the hints that whoever was there before, they knew that the Mass Effect was going to open up, and so they pieced out. But by piecing out, they actually left some of the Blue Suns behind because it was going to take too long for them to come up from the basement level to the top level and then get out of there in time before the Alliance forces arrived. So mercenaries being mercenaries, they're like, meh. Well, sometimes you gotta sacrifice because money, it's all about the money, and so they get left behind. So by the end of chapter 2, it ends with them, they get into this firefight, they kill most of them, but I think it's like 2 of them survive, and they run off deeper into this station. So Anderson goes forward with one of his soldiers while leaving 3 behind to cover their flanks, and by the time they get there, they realize this place is all wired up to explode. The Mercs actually drag back all of the Alliance personnel, whether they were soldiers, whether scientists, whatever, all into this room because when this thing explodes, it's basically to cover their tracks. It destroy all evidence. This also reinforces the idea that someone on the inside was behind this because these soldiers had the code to lock doors, and so Anderson has to make a split decision. He can send in his tech experts to disarm this thing, but of course if this thing goes off, they all get screwed anyways, and they have to get back to kind of report back what they've learned. And so split decision, Anderson says just run, everyone get the hell out of there. He sends the 3 people that were covering their backs to get to the elevator, and if they're given the order to get out of there, they got to get out of there. And I didn't explain what this next pattern is all about, but conflict arises. It's made up of 3 things: call to action, hero's reluctance, and Hero's Acceptance. Now, the one that this chapter, the one where they push in and find that bomb and then have to bail out, this is all the call to action, and it's really just about that investigation, finding out there's mercs involved, and needing to get the hell out. The call to action is just, it's something is going down, it's an inside thing. It really sets up the story again, it reinforces what the story is, which we're going to get into with the next two parts, Hero's Reluctance and Hero's Acceptance. Those two parts don't fall on Anderson, they're actually going to fall on a new character who gets introduced, First Lieutenant Kaylee Sanders. And it's pretty cool that, you know, the Hero Reluctance and the Hero Acceptance parts fall on Kaylee Sanders, because what this actually tells us is that Anderson isn't the protagonist in the story. He's important to the story. They spent the first 60 pages on it, but he's not the main protagonist. The pattern tells us that what happens after about page 54, that's actually going to be our protagonist, because that's between page 54 and page 80 is when the character we get introduced to is going to be confronted with something that they have to reject. Like, something happens. I'll describe the byline here is the hero refuses the call to action. It tends to come in the form of a debate, like the why should I do anything, and it's very explicit again. Kaylee Sanders left Sidon. She was part of what was going down there, and her leaving Sidon was actually a criminal mistake. Let's call that a mistake right now. But if she didn't get back within 24 hours, it was open to even court-martialing. Like, it was a serious offense to leave that project and bail out. But why she bailed out is because she came into evidence that revealed shady work, that revealed corruption on the inside and at top levels. And so when she left, it's like, what am I going to do about this? I have this evidence, but if I tell my superiors, what if my superiors are part of this? Like she doesn't know who to trust, you know what I mean? So she bails out and she goes to this bar called the Black Hole, which, by the way, is an awesome name for a bar, which is on Elysium. And she got off of Sidon by using a fake pass, and then she's just hiding out at this bar trying to figure out, like, what do I do next? I can go back and just be a part of that, but she can't, because, and here's the reluctance part kicking in, right? Because she knows something's corrupt. She has to make a decision. Is she going to do something about the stuff she's learned about? But who does she tell? Who the hell does she tell? Which is all about that hero's reluctance. That's how we know she is the main protagonist of the story, because she's the one she's the one with the decision that she has to make. And of course, this ends with the hero's acceptance, and hero's acceptance is around page 68. That's her. The end of that chapter, actually close to page 68, is she leaves the bar after hearing news on the TV about Sidon going down, basically being attacked, and that there were no survivors. And that's the key statement. There's always that key statement. Remember, I said there's always, the byline here is there's always something happens to trigger the debate and be that catalyst. The why should I? In this case, it's the you have no evidence of being alive. Like, you can do whatever you want now. That's the catalyst. Is you can just go about your life now and just start a new one because you're dead as far as anyone's concerned. Or you can come to terms with what happened, and you can step up and do something about it. Now, before she can make that decision, she leaves the bar and she gets confronted by an Alliance officer. Let's put that in quotes, because of course very quickly we discover it's actually a Blue Suns merc that's pretending to be an Alliance person to bring her in. She realizes this by looking at a sidearm. I thought that was a very, 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 very cool little detail, because it talks to her intuition, her like gut instincts and her training. She looks down and she sees that the firearm is not Alliance issued, and so she immediately, she's already kind of cuffed, like with her hands behind her back, but she headbutts the guy, and then she pulverizes the guy. Essentially, she doesn't kill him, but she mangles him pretty bad, and she finds the keys, frees herself, and then takes off. And we don't know what she does next, but we do by the end of chapter 5. But chapter 5 actually kicks off in the section that triggers the third cluster of patterns, which is what I call Journey Begins. Now, when the Journey begins category. It's the hero sets off to find answers, seek truth, seek resolution, explore abilities, and see the new world that they ventured into. You see how this is already applying as a pattern? This is just a byline I use to kind of get my head in the right space. But now we've left off with Kaylee Sanders going to see someone that she promised her mother she would never go see. Of course, I already know the answer because I've read one more chapter, but the idea is there was probably a divorce. She's probably going to go see her father, and because of the way the story started, it's probably gruesome. And it is. I'm just gonna say it is, because we get to the end of chapter 5 after, and that's the confirmation. You have a quick break after Blue Sun's scene, which I'll talk to in a second, but then it ends off with Kaylee being at the door of her father, Grissom, who does feel like he's retired at this point. He doesn't want to deal with anybody. He's done like thousands of interviews. He just wants to be left alone. He's going to punch a reporter in the face if it's a reporter. Funny how that kind of plays out in the games. And anyways, so now I'm going to reverse, because the actual chapter 5 is about the Blue Suns. Around page 80 is we actually creep into the third pattern category called Journey Begins. What this category also represents is the break from Act 1 into Act 2. So we've officially kicked off into Act 2 by page 80, and what that generally means in novels, broken down by this page count, is that you're entering what I call Allies Made. It's the first sub-pattern of this category. It's made up of 3 patterns. We're only going to get into the first one, but it's Allies Made, Exploration, and Settling In. Now, Allies Made is usually in a movie, by this point in a novel, in a comic, is when you take a step back from the catalyst actions, the introduction, like learning about what the story's going to be, etc., and you're kicking off into the B plots. You have to introduce the side characters. You have to introduce stuff about the setting. This is like where like the fluff content comes from. You just want to get the experiencer, whether it's the moviegoer or the reader, you want to get them immersed in the world. Now this is your opportunity. You're going to have the next stack of pages in this case to do that with, and the first part of this we do creep into. And how far do we get into this? It's supposed to end at about page 94, and chapter 5 ends at page 88. So this is pretty much the entire chunk of Allies Made. Byline here is that this is usually when secondary stories are set up, whether they're romantic stories, whether they're friendships made, whether it's the theme being reinforced, which I already talked about. But in this particular case, it's when we're introduced to the Blue Suns and introduced to a Batarian mogul by the name of Eden Haddah, which has connections to what went down in Sidon, and he's really trying to keep hush-hush about him being like this I guess business mogul, or corrupt business mogul in any case. But he's this rich ass dude. He's like, he lives on the other side of the planet essentially, but he flies into this one area where he deals with his merc contacts. Like when he does shady business, he doesn't do it in his in his home plane. He goes to this place to deal with it, and it's basically him coming in to hire a Krogan. And the idea here is because his initial mercs, the one that got destroyed by Kaylee, failed. The mercs failed, and now he needs to up his game. He needs to hire someone who's more of a specialist. And of course he goes to Krogan, because Krogans being Krogans, they're going to track down whoever they're going to track down. They're paid a lot more, but they're going to do it. This chapter is literally all about just being introduced to how this guy interacts with his Batarian mercs, how he deals. He's a very smart Batarian, but he's very arrogant, and little details like, the Krogan leans to the right, and that's very offensive because that's what superiors do to inferior contacts. So the Krogan doing that, he's like, did he do that because he's trying to screw with me, or is he just ignorant? And then the Krogan, I forget what the other thing, but there's a second thing that the Krogan does where it's again offensive from the Batarian standpoint. and he's like, did the Krogan do that because he's ignorant, or is he, is this Krogan just he knows what he's doing? He's trying to get under my skin, and he does, and he succeeds at getting under. He's a very, very smart negotiator. This Krogan. The Krogan's name is Scar, and the Krogan sees things that kind of gets under his skin, but he knows more than he's been told still, because they haven't even talked. They haven't discussed what the job is. But this Krogan's coming in saying, "So is this about Sidon?" And he's like, "What the fuck? How does he know about this?" And then he doesn't answer him, but the Krogan's like, "My fee just went up," So it's like very awesome Krogan character. And so what happens is after the third offense, one of the Batarian blue sun mercs is like, that's one offense too much. He draws a gun, and as soon as he does that, the Krogan just like mangles this guy, pulverizes this guy with a backhand punch. Like one punch, guy's like done, he's dead. And so the other two that are kind of flanking him pull out their gun. They don't pull out guns, sorry, because they were told not to kill him. This is so smart, such a clever chapter. They were told not to kill him, so they kind of they're getting on him to kind of pound. So the Krogan gets a dagger from like his boot or some crap, messes up another guy beside him, like immediately destroys this guy, and then turns to the other one. One of the mercs pulls back and pulls a gun out, and at this point it's like, okay, now all of the other mercs, there's like a dozen of them, pull out their assault rifles, point at the Krogan, and the businessman basically says, okay, don't move. And so the Krogan drops his gun, still super confident, because it's like, if you wanted to kill me, you wouldn't have had guys pile up on me and not pull out their guns immediately. My price just went up. I friggin' love that, man. Anyways, and then the Krogan just looks at the one, it's like a human merc at this point, who, like, all the other mercs are like, screw this, I'm out. But this human merc is like, no, we can't just let him get away with this. Like, he killed our friends, right? And he's looking at these other blue suns like, why aren't you doing anything about this? And Scar's like, you got the count to 3 to back down. Like, just be wise here, be smart, you know? And he says 1. And then there's like this paragraph or 2 description of just stuff that's going down, and like, he's like, there's like this aura shimmering around the Krogan, and you're like, oh shit, and Krogan is a biotic, you know? And then 2, and then it's like, you can tell like the description does a little bit more of like, you know, this human probably doesn't even know what's going down, because humans don't have natural biotics yet. Like, that isn't part of it. Like, this is very early on, and then of course he gets to 2, and then he just does his biotic attack. This guy goes flying up against the wall, drops his weapon. The Krogan then charges him, puts him up against the ceiling by the throat, just chokes the life out of him and says, you know, I hope you understand that there's honor in being killed by a Krogan battle master. And then he just shakes the guy around, breaks his larynx or whatever the hell, throws him down. So, and then my price just went up. Or I don't think it happens there, but it should. If it didn't, it should have. I don't know. I love that every time something skewy happened, like, the guy was he was ready to just say, like, don't mess with me, man. Like, just, what is the deal? Tell me the deal, and I'll do it. Like, but now you're going to pay me more, you know? And so they make the deal, and his deal, and of course the mission is find Kaylee Sanders, to track her down and kill her, essentially. And that's how this chapter ends. It was a wonderful ending to my reading session. That's all I'm going to read today, because I wanted to get this video out while it was just fresh. I wanted to get this new format out in the open, just to see what you guys think, because if you're also a Dragon Age fan and you're following the Dragon Age, the Soul and Throne series, you can then have, you know, you can compare these two. This is a lot more frenetic. I'm a little bit all over the place, but I hope I got my points across. I still got to highlight how this narrative patterns framework works, and I still think it was fun. I actually got more excited talking about it. I was pretty excited reading it, to be frank. This is written really well. The pacing is very good. The characters so far are really good. Even Anderson's team, there's just enough description to make them stand out. But again, because it's in those first chapters, until you get to page 80, you don't spend too much time talking about these side characters. You do that after Act 2, after you get into the exploration chapter, which will be the next chapter, by the way. I haven't even started to see what's going down here. I just read the name Anderson, so it's already telling me in the first like 1 or 2 paragraphs. So chapter 6 is going to be about exploration. This is where Drew Karpyshyn is going to now set up the pieces on the good side. It's going to set up Anderson's team a little bit more. By page 108 or so, it's going to be settling in. I'm going to predict that that's when Anderson or Grissom is going to take his daughter, or is going to inform Anderson. Basically, that's where I believe Kaylee is going to get in sync with Anderson, and then we're going to get into the next category, the next pattern category, called challenge accepted, and that's where the confrontation here. So that's where the story is going to start. It's going to start in that second part of Act 2. Act 2 is made up of 4 parts. It is not evenly spaced. It's usually 1/4, and then the second fourth, third fourth is Act 2, and then the last fourth is Act 3. Anyways, Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm actually parched now. It might have something to do with the fact that I just finished smoking a cigar while reading the first 80 pages, but I'm going to get some whiskey now because that's what I do. I should have done that with my script. Doesn't matter. I'm derailing. Let me know what you guys think. Share your thoughts, and I look forward to doing these again a lot quicker. I will come back with the next 80 pages. Probably by next weekend or something. Probably. I don't know. But now that I have a way to do this casually, I think we're gonna get some quicker pace happening here. I'm playing Mass Effect 3, which is why I need to get through these books. You see them here. I got things to get through, man, because I feel like I want all of this information in my head while playing Mass Effect 3. That's it. I've rambled on. Don't forget to explore, engage, and aspire. Catch you next time. Peace.